He knocked just as the wind leaned against the house, the kind of knock that learns your name before you open the door. I hadn't lit a candle yet. The room was all winter and breath, but I could feel his face listening through the wood. Chapter 1. The Candle. The first knock didn't sound like a knock at all. It was softer, more of a pause pressed against the wood, a hush that waited to be heard. I was sitting near the stove, coaxing a bit of life out of the coals, when the wind leaned hard against the siding and made the house breathe in. The lamp had gone out hours earlier, and the darkness had grown familiar enough that I stopped noticing it. Then came the second knock, clearer this time, deliberate, a sound that had learned patience. I rose slowly, the floor cold under my bare feet. The storm outside was steady now, snow whispering sideways across the porch. When I opened the door, the night pushed its breath into the room and brought him with it. He stood there like the weather itself, a tall man wrapped in a coat that had lost its shape to travel, snow clinging to his shoulders, his eyes the color of late-day ice. In one hand he held his hat, in the other a stub of something wrapped in paper. For a moment we simply looked at each other, neither sure which of us belonged to the inside. "Evenin'," he said finally. His voice was rough from wind and distance. "I'm lookin' for a bit of light. Your father, he promised me one." The words folded the air between us. He said them as if repeating an old line he wasn't sure still meant anything. "Pie father?" I asked. "He's been gone a long while." He nodded as if that too was part of the promise. Still, he said his door would stay open for those walkin' in the dark. I should have closed the door, that's what the town would tell you. But there was something about the way he stood there, not pleading, not proud, just waiting, as though the road itself had told him to stop here. So I stepped aside and let him in. The warmth of the stove found him slow. He took a seat near the table, the chair creaking under his weight. I fetched the old brass candlestick from the shelf and the box of matches from the drawer. The first match sputtered and died. The second caught, flaring bright before settling to a small, steady flame. I placed the candle between us. The light drew the room back together. The grain of the table, the faint steam rising from his coat, the tired lines that mapped his face. He looked older than my father had ever been, yet there was a likeness in the shape of the jaw, in the quiet way he studied the flame instead of me. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "Eli." The name stirred something unplaced, a sound I'd heard in stories my father used to tell when the nights were long. He'd speak of a friend from his younger days, one who could make fire out of damp wood and laughter out of silence. But that was before the river, before the winter that took nearly everything. I sat opposite him. Outside, the storm muttered against the glass. "You knew him?" I asked. "I did." He rubbed his hands together, slow, deliberate. "Long time back. We worked the rails one season. Your father kept a candle in his pack, said every man ought to carry his own daylight. When we parted, he gave me this." Eli set the small wrapped bundle on the table. It was a candle stub, yellowed with age, bound in paper that had darkened at the folds. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing wax scored with the marks of a thumb that might have been my father's. "He told me," Eli continued, "that if the world ever went dark again, I was to find this house. Said his girl would know what to do with a bit of light." His words felt rehearsed and true all at once. I reached out and touched the old wax. It was cold but familiar, like something waiting to be remembered. "My father liked to promise things," I said. "Sometimes he kept them. Sometimes he just wanted to believe he could." Eli smiled, faint and lopsided. "That's the sort of promise that keeps men walkin'." The candle between us flickered, throwing our shadows onto the wall where they leaned close together as though listening. He looked toward them and said quietly, "He saved my life once. Figured I owed him a bit of livin' to make it square." The house creaked in reply. I thought of the old blue tin above the stove, the one that still smelled of river smoke and pine, the one my father had used for matches. Without knowing why, I fetched it down. The lid was stiff with rust, but when I pried it open, the smell of sulfur and old days rose out. Inside were 3 matches, a key, and a folded scrap of paper. Eli's eyes followed my hands. He didn't move or speak. The paper was thin, torn from a receipt, the handwriting small and hurried. "If Eli comes, give him fire. If I come, forgive me." My breath caught. Eli closed his eyes as though he could see the words through the dark of his lids. "He remembered," he whispered. After all that time. I nodded, though I didn't yet understand what it was he was remembering. The candlelight trembled. The storm pressed harder at the windows as if to listen. What happened? I asked. Eli opened his eyes. There's a story, he said. But stories ain't free. They cost what they tell. He reached across the table and placed his palm over the matches. They're yours, I said. He shook his head. Not yet. Some things have to be spoken before they can burn. The flame bent lower, thin but stubborn. He leaned close, his voice dropping to a hush. It was by the river. Your father and me. There was another, a boy. The night went wrong. He promised we'd all come back with light. Only 2 of us did. The words fell like ashes. He sat back, the story unfinished but already too heavy for the room. Outside, the wind changed direction. The snow sounded like sand across the glass. I could feel the cold creeping toward the edges of the light. Eli stared into the flame as if waiting for it to judge him. Finally he said, he told me if the dark ever found me again I should come here. Said you'd know how to keep a promise he couldn't. I looked at the candle, his, mine, my father's, and thought how fragile light really was, how it asked to be believed in every second. I struck another match and lit a second candle from the first. The small flame doubled, softening the lines of the room. There, I said. Now it's not just your promise or his. It's ours until we finish the story. Eli watched the new flame grow steady, the reflection swimming in his eyes. For the first time since he'd entered, his shoulders eased as though the weight of the road had shifted somewhere else. He nodded. I reckon I can start at the beginning then, he said. The house seemed to settle around us. The storm slowed, or maybe the world had just learned to listen. The 2 candles burned side by side, the air between them warm and gold. And in that small circle of light the stranger stopped being a stranger. He was only a man who had walked too far to find what my father had promised. A place where darkness ends, if only for a little while. Chapter 2, The Smell of Matches. The smell of sulfur is the first thing I remember from being small. Not bread, not soap, not hay after rain. Sulfur. My father would strike a match and the air would bloom with that sharp brightness, and for 1 second the whole world would feel like it knew my name. I learned to trust that smell more than his footsteps, more than the promises he tossed like a coin to see which side would land up. When the match caught, the light said we were all right, at least until it went out. That smell rose now, faint but certain, when I slid the blue tin closer to the candle. Eli watched my hands as if each finger were a page he'd already read and lost. He had the stillness of someone who'd walked long enough to know when not to move. I lifted one of the 3 matches and felt its small weight, the wood dry and splinter smooth. Outside, the storm shouldered the house with a tired insistence. Somewhere in the attic, a nail complained. The 2 candles bowed toward each other and licked their own shadows thin. You keep things the way he did, Eli said, voice quiet, almost not wanting to be heard. Tin on the same shelf. Brass candlestick with the little dent. He dented it the night He stopped. His eyes went to the window, to the pale smear of snow drifting across the glass like a hand trying to wipe the world clean. He dented it when? I asked. When he came back from the river without enough words, he said. Set it too hard on the table and it tipped. He didn't notice. Some kinds of tire don't let you notice anything that doesn't bleed. He touched the brass, finding the dent with a thumb the way you'd test a healed bone. The candle flame shook against his skin and steadied. I let the match rest on the tin while the silence arranged itself around us. It was a good silence, useful. The kind my mother would work inside of, foot pedal clicking soft, the needle traveling a quiet river through cloth. I realized I was doing the same thing, sewing in my way, threading questions to hold a shape. How long did you carry that candle? I asked. Long enough for wax to learn my pocket, he said, the ghost of a smile, quick as a seam. Long enough for me to run out of reasons to keep it. He pulled the old stub closer. The parchment wrapper had been folded, then unfolded 100 times. A crease ran through my father's handwriting like a small crack through a window. Light. I traced the word with one finger and the paper sighed a little. Light isn't enough by itself, I said. No, he agreed. But it lets you see what is. He sat with his hands near the flame, not warming them so much as measuring them to it. The backs of his hands were mapped with scratches and small scars. There was a seam along one knuckle, pale and raised, the kind the day gives you when you aren't paying attention. He had a way of looking without staring, of being in the room without crowding it. If he'd wanted to pretend he wasn't a man who had run out of beginnings, he could have. But he didn't try. You said there was a boy, I told him. And that you and my father owed him light. He nodded once as if admitting to the weather. Tommy. The name sat down between us. I felt it settle into the grain of the table with a soft insistence. It had the shape of something kept at the back of a drawer so long the wood had taken its impression. How old? I asked. 17 when the river took its first piece of him, he said. Older than both of us when it finished. I waited. He watched the candles. He didn't look at me when he started. We'd been running lines along the creek, deeper than we should have, he said. Spring had lied about how gentle it meant to be. Your father said the water was a mood and we'd read it wrong. We had the lantern, but the wind was in a mean sort of talkative. Blew its own weather into the glass. Tommy stumbled near the bend where the bank is made out of promises and loose dirt. You know the place. I did. A piece of the bank there slants like it's tired of standing. You can make it down easy. Getting back up is a different math. Your father reached for him and got him once, he said. Got me the time before that. Kept getting whoever was closest to the edge and hoping the third hand would belong to God. He took the old stub of candle and turned it between his fingers, slow as thought. The lantern went out at the wrong breath. That's how it happens. Not on a scream. On a breath. When took it? We had matches but wet ones. Tommy had the ring his brother made him twisted on a finger and it caught a bit of light from nothing at all, and I remember thinking, if we could just get light to touch it again we could make the rest of him stay. He cleared his throat like the word had hurt him. Your father told me to hold the rope. I told him to hold the rope. We both wanted to hold the part that made the saving, not the waiting. He went down the bank anyway. I don't know if he expected the ground to keep him like it used to. Half the world had turned into water and the other half wanted to. His voice thinned there. He glanced at the tin again as if there were more matches hidden under the 3 we could see. When it was done, the river did what rivers do. It kept and it gave back in the same voice. We counted until counting made the shape of a prayer. Then maybe we kept counting because we were scared to learn another language. He let out a breath he'd been keeping for years. Tommy's name wouldn't leave me for a whole winter. I thought if I carried this, he lifted the candle, I could bear his name less like a weight and more like a lantern. I listened to the stove settle into its own breathing. The room had grown warmer without getting easier. I looked down at the 3 matches and felt something childish move in me, the part that believed if I struck one the light would explain things. Do you want to light it? I asked, nodding to the old stub. He shook his head. Not yet. I walked all the way here to see if keeping a promise could be more than not breaking one. You talk like him, I said. Who? My father. Then I owe you an apology, he said with a softness that didn't quite make it to his smile. I thought about the brass, the dent, the way my father would come back from places and set things down like he didn't trust the table to hold them. My mother used to place her hand on top of his and smooth the moment flat. There were days I thought she ironed the house. I have something, I said, standing. The floor creaked under my heel, that same note it had played my whole life. I went to the cupboard and brought out a chipped mug, then to the stove for water gone off the boil. I poured, and the steam curled up and brushed Eli's face like a tentative hand. I added a little honey because the sound of his voice had made me think of the winter my mother lost hers to cold and took it back with sweetness. He wrapped his hands around the mug and closed his eyes like he was saying grace without telling the words. The hint of sulfur still hung in the room, invisible and bright. I realized I was keeping the match in my palm. I put it down gently like it might crack. Your father gave me work when the mill wouldn't, he said after a while. Said a man who can mend a fence can mend a day. He believed in small things done right. He believed that made big things mind their manners. Sometimes he believed easier than he could do, I said. That too, Eli answered. He believed in me when I was sorely inconvenient to believe in. He sipped and grimaced at the sweetness, then took another sip on purpose. You're like him around the eyes, he added. I get that with the bill at the store, I said. He laughed, short and surprised, like a drawer catching and then opening. I thought of asking the longest question. Where have you been? But I had a feeling the answer was miles and years and a road that didn't care for company. Instead I asked the shorter one. Why tonight? He looked at the small circle of light between us, then past it, to where our shadows overlapped on the wall like a single taller person contemplating the room. Because the dark finally learned my name again, he said. And because he told me to come when it did. He asked though I knew. Your father, he said. In his letters in my head. Same difference. I felt the key in my apron pocket move with my breath as if it wanted to be part of the talk. I kept my hand away from it. Some objects don't like to be seen too early. There are beginnings that must arrive from the far side. Will you tell me the rest? I asked. Not all at once. Just enough to make the light honest. He nodded, more to the flame than to me. I'll tell you what I can hold, he said. The rest will let the dark have if it asks polite. We sat again. He leaned forward and set the old stub between the two living candles, as if warming it back into the idea of burning. The wax had a faint gouge from somebody's thumb. My father's probably. I'd seen that habit in the mirror when I was thinking too hard. When we were boys, Eli said, we'd sleep in the field sometimes and talk about what we'd keep lit if we ever had to choose just one thing. He said kindness. I said courage, though I meant relief. Tommy said a porch with a roof that never leaked. We were fools by morning and that helped us survive noon. He paused and I knew the next thing wanted to be placed carefully. After the river, your father gave me this candle and took the lantern for himself. Said I should carry the promise you can put in a pocket and he'd carry the one you can't. And did he? I asked. Until it broke his shoulders, he answered. The stove ticked, then went quiet. The wind in the chimney lowered its voice. I could hear the snow adjusting itself in small private ways on the porch steps. Outside the window, the big birch leaned its white flank against the dark. Eli set the mug down, both hands resting on either side of it. He looked ready to stand and also ready to stay the night. Men who walk far tend to be built for both. What is it you want from me? I asked, realizing we had been talking around that small fire the whole time. He blinked like the question had been in the room and he'd hoped the candles might answer. Then he said, and this was the first plain thing he'd offered, I want to give back what I've carried. I want to light what we failed to. His eyes found mine for the first time without sliding away. He had those winter road eyes that make a person look like they've learned how to be their own landmark. And if light won't change what happened? I asked. It'll change where it lives, he said. Out of my pockets. Into a place that doesn't have to keep walking. I thought of the bridge, of the bend where the bank forgets itself, of the ring of twisted copper a boy's brother might have made. I thought of my father and the way he used to lean his shoulder against the kitchen doorframe like it could teach him to stand still. The two candles threw a soft net of gold across the table, and our hands lay inside that net, harmless as tools after the workday. Then tomorrow, I said, we'll go to the creek. We'll bring what light we can carry. We'll say his name where the water can take it without drowning. Eli's jaw shook once. He swallowed as if his throat were a narrow gate and the sentence had been waiting behind it a long time. All right, he said. He reached toward the blue tin and with a small formal care lifted a match. He did not strike it. He laid it gently beside the old stub, like a thin bone between two heartbeats. For the crossing, he murmured. The smell of sulfur, remembered more than present, threaded the room. I felt it move through me as it always had, first sharp, then clean, then a little sweet as it disappeared. I thought of the years my father had kept that tin, how much of him had been spent enduring the seconds it takes a match to change its mind and bloom. Eli looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I'll make a bed by the stove, he said, already standing to refuse anything softer. You'll take the couch, I told him. It sags, but it sags honest. He gave me a look that might have been gratitude or just a man remembering how to nod when someone offered a thing without price. He pulled off his coat, heavier than it looked, and folded it small. He held onto the parchment a beat longer than he meant to and then set it on the table between the candles. Leave it there, I said. Let it warm. I banked the stove. The house exhaled. The wind stepped one pace back from the windows. I blew out one candle and then the other, leaving the room in the soft gray my eyes could read. The old stub stayed dark, the word light folded into its own quiet. When I turned to go, Eli spoke once more into the almost sleep of the room. Your father told me that when I finally asked for light, it wouldn't be because I wanted to see, he said. It'd be because I was ready to be seen. I'll bring the lamp at sunrise, I said. We'll see each other enough. He lay down on the couch and the springs made a tired, companionable sound. I stood in the doorway and listened to the house make its small night noises. Wood easing, wind measuring itself, the soft, steady work of heat finding corners. I could smell sulfur the way you can smell rain in a story told right. I went to my room without touching the blue tin again. In the dark, I felt the weight of the key in my apron pocket and left it there. It pressed a little shape into my side like a reminder or a bruise. I fell asleep holding the thought that the morning knows things the night is still practicing. The last thing I heard was the couch adjusting to a stranger's bones, and the last thing I saw behind my eyes was a match poised above its own thin miracle, deciding. Chapter 3. My Father's Tin. I woke before the sun, though before hardly meant anything that winter. The dark had learned to stretch itself thin, to linger long after the world should have turned gold again. The stove had gone low, but I could still feel its breath under the ash, like a heart remembering its job. For a moment I didn't know why the house sounded heavier, why it was holding its silence wrong. Then I remembered. A stranger asleep on the couch, a candle that wasn't mine, a story waiting in the corners. I pulled on my father's old sweater, the one with elbows turned soft as apology. The wool still carried the faint scent of pine smoke and metal oil, that smell of work done right. When I stepped into the front room, Eli was already awake. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, watching the first gray thin itself across the window. His coat was folded neatly on the floor, his boots beside it, their soles lined with miles. "You don't sleep much," I said. He smiled without showing teeth. "Sleep's for men who finished something." The house had that half-warm, half-cold feel of early morning. I stirred the stove until the embers remembered themselves, fed it a small armful of wood and poured water into the kettle. Steam began to climb its slow ladder through the light. For a while that was all there was. The quiet labor of a room deciding to live another day. When the kettle sighed, I reached for the tin on the shelf. My fingers hesitated on the lid. I'd dreamt of it, of matches blooming underwater, of my father standing waist-deep in the creek, striking light against the current as if he could shame the river into giving back what it took. Dreams lie, but sometimes only by a hair. Eli's eyes followed me. "Still there?" he asked. "Still there," I said and set the tin down between us. The lid lifted easier this time. Inside, the 3 matches lay like a short prayer. The key beside them had dulled to a pewter gray, its teeth worn smooth. The folded scrap of receipt paper hadn't moved. The smell came first. Sulfur, faint, blended now with the dust of years and something older, something like memory itself catching fire. "My father kept this since I was small," I said. "He'd open it when the lights failed or when he wanted to teach me something about starting again. Said a man ought to know how to wake the dark gentle." Eli nodded. "He used to say that to me too. But he said it after the dark had already woken rough." He reached out but didn't touch the matches. "You know what that key's for?" "I think so," I said, though the truth was a guess shaped like fear. "The barn maybe. One of his lockers." "Then that's where we'll find the rest of him," Eli said. He leaned back, eyes still on the tin. "Your father didn't lose things. He put them where the finding would hurt just enough." The window brightened to the color of tin itself. Outside, the yard was a quilt of snow squares stitched by fence wire. The world looked like something waiting for permission to move. "Tell me more about him," I said, half to the room. "Not the man who kept promises. The one who broke them." Eli rubbed his jaw, the sound like fabric against stone. "He didn't break them. He traded them. Promises for second chances. Some he got back, most he didn't. When he gave me that candle, he thought he was giving me light. He was really giving me the burden of being the one who lived." The kettle began to whistle, a thin human sound. I poured the water over coffee grounds and watched them swirl, dark and restless. "You talk like you still owe him." "I do," he said simply. "You don't walk away from a night like that owing less." He took the cup and held it near his mouth but didn't drink. "After the river, I tried to leave this county. Made it as far as the hills. Every time I struck a match, it smelled like him. I started saving the used sticks in a jar. When I had enough, I buried them. Thought I'd bury the guilt with them. But matches don't rot fast enough for that." He looked toward the tin again. "When word came he'd gone missing, I dug them back up. Carried them in my coat until there was nothing left of me that didn't stink of burnt things." I didn't know what to say to that. The quiet between us was shaped like respect. I picked up the key. It was colder than I expected. Then we'll go see what he left, I said. Eli nodded. After breakfast. Let the day stretch its legs first. We ate bread gone a little hard and apples soft enough to fold in your hand. He ate slowly as if the chewing were part of the penance. When he finished, he set his plate exactly in the ring of light spilling from the candle stub. Funny, he said. Your father used to say the same grace every time we worked a job. Not the church kind. Just 4 words. Let it hold, Lord. Never said what it was. Could have been the rope. Could have been us. Outside, the wind changed direction. I heard a limb drop somewhere out by the fence, a soft thud into snow. The sound reminded me of something ending politely. I wrapped the key in a piece of cloth and slipped it into my pocket. We'll need a lantern, I said. The barn's colder than it looks. I've got my own, he said, reaching for his satchel by the door. From it he drew a small brass lantern dented near the base. My father's initials were scratched into the handle. My breath stopped. He gave you that? He meant to give it back, Eli said. But the night took it from him first. He lifted the latch, looked inside and set it down unlit. We'll let the key do the waking. Before we stepped out, I turned to look at the table one last time. The tin sat open, the matches waiting like a quiet dare. I closed the lid gently. Outside, the air met us with that hush only snow knows how to keep. The path to the barn was half covered, footprints from the night already filled with new powder. The boards of the barn groaned when I pushed the door. It smelled of rope and hay and the long patience of unused things. Eli hung the lantern on a nail. The light from the open door made a pale path toward the far corner where the lockers stood, each one marked with a letter in my father's carving. The key trembled a little in my hand. I could feel the cold bite through the cloth. I slid it into the lock marked H, turned once. The click sounded like something choosing to be forgiven. The door swung open. Inside, dust rose in a soft, slow bloom. On the top shelf sat another candle, its wick unburned. Beside it, a folded piece of canvas tied with blue thread. I lifted both out. The canvas had weight. When I unwrapped it, a small wooden box tumbled into my palm. It was carved with the same initials as the lantern. What's inside? Eli asked. I opened it carefully. A photograph lay inside, its edges curled from age. My father, younger, stood shoulder to shoulder with Eli, though the man beside me didn't look old enough to carry that much road. Between them, half cut from the frame, a boy laughed toward whoever held the camera. The corner of his mouth was all you could see, but it was enough. Tommy, I thought. Under the photograph was a folded scrap of fabric, blue as a half-remembered sky. Sewn in tiny stitches were 3 words. Light was promised. Eli took it in both hands. His lips moved but made no sound. The barn seemed to draw breath for him. After a long moment he said, he wanted to finish this before the end. Couldn't bring himself to sew the last thread. What is it? I asked. A piece of the boy's shirt, he said. I found it snagged on a root when the water went down. Your father asked for it back. Said he needed to make something whole. I couldn't hand it over. Not then. Didn't seem right to let him carry both halves of the loss. He looked up at me, eyes wet without shining. Now maybe it's time. We stood there, the breath from our mouths mixing in the cold, the lantern's glass catching a thin memory of light even unlit. Let's take it inside, I said. The house has better manners for sorrow. Eli nodded. He tucked the blue scrap into his coat and followed me back through the snow. The door closed behind us with a sound that felt like punctuation. Something ended, something else just beginning. On the table, I set the tin beside the photograph. The smell of matches returned, faint but loyal. Eli touched the lid once, then drew his hand back. I think your father meant for you to open that box, not me, he said. He trusted me to bring the story this far. The rest belongs to blood. I didn't argue. Some inheritances don't need signing. We sat, both of us watching the unlit candle from the barn. The morning light through the window made it look as if it were already burning. Tomorrow, I said, we'll see what the river kept. Eli nodded. And maybe what it forgave. The smell of sulfur lingered a little longer, like memory stretching before it sleeps. Chapter 4. The Story He Wouldn't Tell. By afternoon the snow had given up on falling and settled into being. The yard was a hush stretched tight, the kind of quiet that makes you check your own breathing. I stacked wood by the stove and watched Eli from the corner of my eye. He sat at the table the way a man sits in a chapel, hat on the chair back, hands folded not from piety but to keep them from doing what they've done too often. The unlit candle from the barn waited between us like an old question. He hadn't told me the full of it. Not the shape that leaves a mark. I knew he was circling it, waiting for the light to be right. Men who have carried a story too long will not let it out into bad weather. Tea? I asked. Tea would be a mercy, he said. Steam lifted from the kettle in ribbons. I poured and let the cups sit until the air learned their name. Eli watched the window the way you watch a road after you've sworn you're done with it. When he finally spoke, his voice came lower than the room. Your father was the best I ever knew at holding on, he said. Hands like rope when rope runs out. That's how I want you to remember him even when I tell you the part where he couldn't. I'll remember both, I said. He nodded, grateful and afraid of it. His thumb found the dent in the old brass candlestick and rested there, a man checking a healed break. He set his cup down in the ring the candle had made, and the china made that small hollow sound of something set where it belongs. Summer before the river went mean, he began, we worked the rails. Your father said there are two kinds of days, the ones that build a ladder and the ones that burn it. That summer built, plank by plank. Tommy was new on the crew, small-boned, big laugh. Quick with his hands. He looked at your father like a man looks at a place he wishes he was born to. He looked at me like I might know the wrong turns he kept wanting to take. Eli smiled at a thing only he could see. It vanished fast. Tommy had a brother in the army somewhere hot. Wore his ring on a cord tucked under his shirt. Said if you could keep something close to the skin it would learn your heart and act right. The ring was copper, twisted and flattened with a hammer a dozen times until it held. He never took it off, except to clean it with spit and a corner of his sleeve. He had plans. Everything a boy has a right to. A porch with a roof that doesn't leak. A dog that minds better than men. A woman who hums when she thinks she's alone. He let the picture stand there a breath too long, then cleared it with a cough that sounded like gravel under snow. That fall the creek got flashy. Rains came strange, hard and fast, then nothing. When it's like that, the banks get tired. You can hear it in the way the water talks. A kind of hurry and a kind of dare. Your father said we'd move the traps to higher ground. We didn't move all of them. You don't if the lines have been good. You tell yourself the water owes you 2 more nights. The water laughs in a language we don't hear until it's late. He stood and walked to the window as if the scene were outside, not 30 winters ago. Night came blue. Lantern found its small reason. We went along the lower line because not going felt like wasting the half day the river hadn't taken yet. Mud held to the ankles like it had a grudge. Your father went ahead. I carried the line. Tommy carried the sack and whistled that tuneless whistle boys like him think can scare off whatever needs scaring. He turned back, leaned against the sill and closed his eyes long enough for me to wonder if he'd keep going. When he spoke again, his voice had the carefulness of a man walking an edge he's fallen from before. The bank sloughed under him. Not your father, Tommy. It went all at once, like a promise breaking without warming up to it. He slid, hit a root, caught it with both hands. The lantern went sideways and the flame did that thing it does when it remembers the world is bigger than it is. I dropped the line to grab him. Your father grabbed me and set my feet where the ground still believed in itself. Told me to hold and I held. He went down on his belly, reached the boy, got 1 wrist, then 2. And for a second we were a chain God might have been proud of. Eli's hands lifted of their own accord, stacking palm over wrist over forearm in the air between us. He looked at what they built and then let them fall. The river came up for air like a lung and took back the bottom. Tommy's boot went. He turned and the ring cord caught the root. It held. The boy did too. He sat again. Quiet braided itself around his words. Then the lantern took a breath it didn't deserve and went black, he said. It was the kind of dark that takes the sky away. Your father called for me to strike and I struck 1, 2, 3 and they hissed out like lies. The wind had its mouth on us, laughing. I felt for the jar and it wasn't there. I don't know if I lost it in the slide or before. I don't know if it matters. Your father's hands slipped. Not all at once. 1 finger at a time, like a man saying goodbye 5 times in a row. He stopped and the stoppage was a wall. He sat there with it. I let it be. The ring cord snapped, he said finally. Could have been a blessing. Could have been the difference. It snapped and the boy made a sound I never heard before or since. It wasn't a scream. It was the shape of a scream after you've used up the sound. Your father went after him without checking the rope. I swear to you I had it right. But the knot at my end wasn't what it should have been, or the mud said no. Or maybe the river is a priest that demands confession in a language I don't speak. I felt the pull and then I didn't. I felt him and then I felt my own useless weight. He put his hands flat on the table. They were steady. His eyes were not. I went in after. I did. Twice. The water had turned everything into itself. I pulled up a mess of sticks that felt like a boy until it wasn't. I pulled up your father's lantern by the handle. It knocked me in the teeth like a fact. I don't know how long we were in that stupid wrestling match. Long enough for the creek to tell me who I was and be right about it. He took a breath and let it out slow. Come morning, the river gambled us a body. Not your father's. Not mine. I found Tommy hooked on a branch downriver where the eddies do their house cleaning. His face looked like a young man who'd been told a kind lie and said thank you. He still had the copper ring in his fist. The cord was around his wrist, raw where it had burned through. I took the ring because I didn't know what else to take. I left the rest where men better than me had business with him. We sat with that, both of us careful where we placed our eyes. He reached into his coat and set the ring on the table. A small, ugly, beautiful thing. The copper held the color of old pennies and stories told at a table with an ashtray nobody empties often enough. Your father came out of the water with his mouth full of sorry, he said. Spit it and it kept coming. He walked home with the lantern like he'd stolen it. Didn't look back. Didn't look at me. I followed because that's what a man does when he's run out of ideas. He went into your kitchen and set that brass candlestick down like it was the throat of the night. That dent. That's where sorry learned the shape of metal. I looked at the candlestick, the tiny half-moon that had always been there, the one my mother wiped around like it was nothing at all. I reached out and touched it and felt the cold say yes. He gave me the lantern and told me to keep the path lit until his legs remembered their job, Eli said. He gave me that old stub of candle and told me promises outlast hands if you fold them right. I believed him because I needed to, and maybe because he was partly right. What about my mother? I asked, aware of the space her name made in a room like this. She poured water like medicine and said nothing, he said. Wiped your father's face with a cloth that looked like it belonged to kinder days. Sat in that chair and looked at the two of us like we were whether a house learns to survive. Later, days later, she walked to the bridge and left something under the railing. I never asked what. Some griefs have their own altar. He lifted the ring and turned it once between finger and thumb. Your father wrote to me. 3 letters that year. Asked for the ring and for the shirt scrap when I was done being mad at God. I kept the ring. You've seen the scrap. It took me 20 winters to bring the one and the other to your door. I ain't proud of that arithmetic. Wind worked the eaves. The stove ticked itself into steadiness again. I poured more tea just to give my hands an errand. What do you want me to do with this? I asked, meaning the ring, the candle, the unlit afternoon, the story that had reached its low water mark and shown the stones. Say his name, Eli said. Where the water can hear you. Then light what we didn't. We'll go at dusk, I said. The river listens better when the day is between breaths. He nodded as if he knew that already. He slid the ring across the table and I let it stop against my palm. It felt warmer than it should, as if it had kept a boy's heat in it all this time and was only now sharing out the last of it. There's one more thing your father said, Eli added, quieter than any word he'd said so far. He told me if ever I came back to this house, I shouldn't ask for forgiveness first. I should ask for light. Said light was the only thing he had that wasn't borrowed. I set the ring beside the blue tin and the candle. 3 small things. A triangle a room could pray to. Then we won't start with forgiveness, I said. We'll start with light. Eli closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were less winter and more sky. The weather hasn't decided yet. We waited for the day to move across its small distance. I mended a tear in my sleeve with the blue thread my mother liked for the kind of fixes nobody brags on. Eli took the old lantern apart and cleaned the glass the way a man cleans a grave. Slow, grateful, not talking. He oiled the hinge and put it back together in a silence that didn't ask to be named. Near sundown, the snow began to glow with its own light, that hour when the world looks borrowed from a kinder place. I wrapped a scarf around my throat and tucked the ring into my pocket with the key and the scrap of blue fabric. Eli lifted the lantern and for the first time since he'd come, struck a match. The smell of sulfur rose, sharp, honest, then sweet on the back end like all true things. Flame climbed the wick, vain for a breath and then modest. He closed the little door and the light settled into the glass like a good heart. He looked at me and something in his face had let go without breaking. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said, feeling how the word fit in the mouth, how it moved the chest. We stepped into the dusk. The yard, the fence, the path to the creek. All of it lay under a thin skin of brightness, like frost's gentler cousin had been by with a paintbrush. The lanterns swayed between us, a small sun with our names on it. Behind us, the house watched us go the way a mother watches children cross a street. Practiced, brave, counting. Ahead, the river thought its winter thoughts under ice that cracked softly, the way old wood calls out to those it carries. We walked without speaking. Some roads prefer reverence to story. When the bridge came into view, a dark line set on white, we both stopped, not from fear but from recognition. You could feel where the world had remembered pain and promised to hold it. Eli lifted the lantern. "Let it hold, Lord," he said. This time I knew what it was. It was us and the story and the thin, stubborn flame. It was the boy's name and the ring and the part of my father that could hold on and the part that couldn't. It was the night learning a better ending. We stepped onto the bridge together. Chapter 5. The photograph. The bridge moaned beneath our boots, old planks remembering every foot that had ever crossed. The river below whispered in its winter tongue, half ice, half voice, each ripple a small unburial of sound. Eli held the lantern steady, the glow trembling over the rail where frost bloomed like white moss. He leaned forward and set the lantern down, the light spilling into the water. "He promised this light would never go out," he said. He meant it like a prayer, not a prophecy. I stood beside him and felt the weight of the ring, the fabric, the key in my pocket, relics of a life I'd inherited without consent. I thought of my father's hands, how they'd always smelled faintly of smoke and rain, how he'd rest them on the table after supper, palms up, as if to show us he wasn't hiding anything. But there were always things hidden, not out of malice but because a man can't hold light and darkness at the same time without burning himself. Eli cleared his throat. After the river he wrote to me once more. One letter. I never answered. He drew something from his coat, a small folded square of paper stained with years and fingerprints. "Found this in his last box," he said. "You should see it." I took it carefully. The paper felt thin, fragile as old bark. I opened it under the lantern light. Inside was a photograph. My father, younger, standing with two others on the same bridge where we now stood. The river behind them was swollen, restless. He and Eli had their arms around a boy, their faces caught between pride and warning. The boy's smile, that half-smile of someone who hasn't yet learned the price of staying, was unmistakable. "Tommy," I whispered. "Tommy," Eli echoed. His voice broke softly on the name, the way ice breaks under its own weight. There was writing on the back of the photograph. My father's hand again, the same cramped lettering that filled his old receipts and lists. "If this picture ever leaves the house, let it travel only toward forgiveness." The sentence hummed in me, quiet as a prayer you don't remember learning. I looked at Eli but his eyes were far away, not on me, not on the bridge, but somewhere in that frozen moment the photograph had stolen from time. "He carried that picture for years," Eli said. "Never showed it. I reckon he thought if he looked long enough the boy would start breathing again." He rubbed his palms together as though trying to warm them against ghosts. When he gave me the candle he said, "Light's no use without someone to see it." I didn't understand then. I think I do now. The lantern's flame guttered, caught its breath, then steadied again. The water below seemed to take that breath too. "Your father never forgave himself," Eli said. "But he forgave the river. Said it just did what it was made to do, move. He wished he could have done the same." I held the photograph closer to the lantern. The three of them, my father, Eli, Tommy, their faces blurred where moisture had eaten the print. I traced the edge of my father's coat, the shadow of his hand on the boy's shoulder. It looked like he was already letting go. "Keep it," Eli said. "He'd want you to." I hesitated. "You sure?" He nodded. "I've memorized it. Paper doesn't hold truth anyway. People do." The words landed heavy and kind. I tucked the photograph into my coat pocket. It fit too perfectly, as if the fabric had been waiting for it all along. We stood a while longer, the silence stretching but not breaking. The river beneath us sighed, soft and endless. Then Eli said, "He told me once, every story needs its light and its witness. Guess that's why you're here." "Guess that's why you came back," I said. He smiled faintly, eyes glinting with the lantern's reflection. "I came back because promises walk faster than men. I just followed the tracks." We turned toward the house, the light bobbing between us like a slow heartbeat. As we walked, snow began again, gentle, aimless flakes that caught in the lamplight and turned to gold for half a second before vanishing. Inside, I set the photograph on the table beside the blue tin and the unlit candle. The three small things, the matches, the key, the picture, sat like the pieces of an unfinished prayer. The room was warm now and quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand, only waits. Eli took his seat again, eyes on the tin. "He said you'd know what to do with fire," he murmured. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe it's time I learned." I reached for a match. It felt too light for the weight it carried. The sulfur flared and the flame rose sharp and sudden, painting Eli's face in copper and shadow. I held it over the new candle from the barn. The wick caught, drank, then settled. A soft, steady glow. We both leaned back, breathing easier. The smell of sulfur hung between us, old, familiar, and almost sweet. "That's better," he said. "For now," I replied. We sat there a long time, two silhouettes stitched together by the same small flame. The photograph gleamed faintly in the light, the boy's blurred grin just visible, the ghost of a promise remade. Outside, the wind picked up again, moving through the trees like a hymn half remembered. The house creaked softly, the wood expanding in warmth. And for the first time in years, the darkness around us felt like something that could be trusted, not gone, not conquered, but simply willing to share its space with light. Chapter 6. The Barn. By morning, the snow had hardened to glass. Every step outside cracked the world a little. I could see my breath, pale ribbons weaving through the cold. The house behind us sighed as we shut the door, the sound of warmth closing in on itself. Eli carried the lantern again, the same one my father had left him. Its glass caught the dull daylight, throwing crooked gold across the path. The key, wrapped in cloth, pressed against my palm as if it had been waiting for this morning. We didn't speak. The air had that kind of quiet that listens back. Somewhere down the valley, a crow called once, sharp and alone. The barn stood ahead of us, big, stooped, half forgotten, the red of its paint gone to rust and memory. It had always felt like the oldest part of the farm, like it knew things the house didn't dare say aloud. When we reached it, I hesitated with the key at the door. The lock was stiff, the kind that prefers to stay locked. I pressed my thumb against the cold iron, thought of my father's hand doing the same maybe years ago, maybe on a morning like this one. "Go on," Eli said softly. "He meant for you too." The key turned with a sound like something clearing its throat. The door opened slow, the wood sticking where frost had made promises overnight. Inside, the air was full of dust and rope and time. Eli lifted the lantern, and its circle of light found the beams overhead. Spiderwebs hung like lace, a broken rake leaning like an old man against the wall. There was the smell of hay gone to dust and iron that remembered work. "He spent most of his nights out here," I said. "I know," Eli replied. "He said the house was for the living. The barn was for the things he couldn't say in front of them." I looked at him. "You came here before?" He nodded once. "After the river." "Once." The word hung there, heavier than the air. At the far end of the barn, where the boards split enough to let in a thread of pale light, stood an old work table. Its surface was scored and scarred, every line a day's worth of thoughts. Tools lay scattered, a hammer, a rusted pair of pliers, nails in a coffee tin. And there, half covered by a folded tarp, was a small wooden chest I didn't remember. I brushed the dust off with my sleeve. The chest was simple, pine darkened with oil, corners joined by the care of a man who built things to last. The latch had no lock, just a nail bent sideways to keep it shut. When I lifted it, something inside shifted, soft, not heavy. I set it on the table. The sound of the nail straightening back into place felt almost alive. "Do you want me to open it?" Eli asked. I shook my head. "If he left this for anyone, it's not you." He stepped back, giving me room. The lantern light caught on the fine dust swirling in the air, 1,000 tiny ghosts spinning in silence. I lifted the lid. Inside lay bundles of paper tied with twine, edges browned, the ink faded to a ghost of blue. Beneath them, something glinted faintly, a small metal locket scratched but still holding its shape. The papers were letters. I could tell by the rhythm of the folds, the weight of the ink. My name wasn't on any of them. I picked one up carefully and untied the twine. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's, slanted and certain, the loops strong even at the ends of sentences. The first line stopped my breath. For the one who finds this light again. It wasn't to me. It wasn't to anyone in particular. It was to the act of finding. I read aloud so the barn could hear. If you've come this far, then the dark has already done its work. I tried to build something that could outlast my silence. This barn, these walls, this table, they've all heard what I couldn't tell. If Eli has come back, let him know I never blamed him. If my daughter finds this first, tell her the light was always hers to keep. I stopped there. The next lines had blurred with water, or tears maybe. I could still make out pieces. The boy's name should be spoken. The bridge still remembers. And finally at the bottom, forgive me when you can. Light the candle when you do. My throat tightened. I folded the letter and held it a moment before setting it aside. The locket beneath the stack was warm from the lantern light. Inside was a photograph. My mother, younger, her hair braided back, eyes bright as rain. And tucked behind her picture, another. A small boy, his smile uneven, his collar wet, Tommy. Eli's hand covered his mouth. He turned away, shoulders trembling once, twice. He kept that, he whispered. All this time. I nodded. Maybe to remind himself that the river didn't take everything. He came closer, his voice rough with guilt. You could hate him for not telling you. I don't, I said. I think he was still learning how. I took the blue fabric scrap from my pocket and laid it beside the letters. The colors matched, faint thread from the same cloth, once whole. My father had kept half. The river the other. And here they were, together again. Eli leaned against the work table, eyes closed. He asked me to finish something for him once, he said. Said it was a kind of confession. I told him I didn't know how. He said, then learn. He looked at me. Maybe this is the learning. The lantern hissed softly as its flame shrank, reminding us that light runs out if you don't tend it. I gathered the letters back into the chest, leaving one open on top. I struck a match, that old smell blooming again, and lit the candle we'd brought from the house. Its glow slipped along the beams, climbed the walls, brushed the roof where dust shimmered like a sky full of secrets. There, I said. He has his light again. Eli nodded, his face soft in the gold. Then maybe he can rest. We stood together watching the candle burn. The barn no longer felt empty. It felt occupied by something gentle and waiting. When we left, I turned once more at the door. The flame was small, but it held its ground against the draft. And in that fragile defiance, I saw what my father had meant all along. Light doesn't have to win. It just has to stay. Chapter 7, Letters in Blue Thread. That night, the candle burned low on the kitchen table. I sat beside it with the chest open, papers spread like fallen leaves. Each letter was dated, but none in order. The handwriting grew steadier, then fractured again, as if the years had moved through him like seasons that never learned how to end. Eli sat across from me, silent. He had the look of someone keeping watch over something that wasn't entirely gone. The house was quiet but not still, the kind of quiet that breathes. Wind in the chimney. Wood shifting its memories. The soft whisper of wax giving up its shape. I took one letter at random, one tied with blue thread instead of twine. The thread was frayed like it had been used before. My father's hand again, though softer this time. Clara. I stitched this line in blue because I couldn't say the words out loud. The boy's mother came yesterday. She didn't weep. She said he had always loved the water. I wanted to tell her it doesn't matter what we love. It takes us anyway. But she had that kind of face that makes silence the better offering. I told her he'd left light behind. She asked where. I said I hadn't found it yet. She said, then it's waiting for you. The ink blurred at the bottom where the pen had been held too long. I traced the blue thread that bound the pages, running my thumb along it. The same color as the scrap from the barn, the same color my mother used to sew hems in the dark. Your mother's thread, Eli said quietly. She brought it to him the morning after. Said it might help him mend something. I nodded. He used it for letters instead. That was her idea, he said. She told him some wounds shouldn't be closed, only bound. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes on the candle flame. When I came here after the river, she met me at that door. She didn't shout. Didn't ask. She just said, if you came for blame, you're too late. I've already taken my share. Then she gave me a cup of coffee and sat where you're sitting now. I looked at the chair, at the smooth dent her body had left in the wood, and felt something move through me. Not grief, but the shape grief had worn thin. She told me to write to him, Eli said. Said it was the only way either of us would ever stop drowning. I found another letter under the stack, written in a different hand, smaller, tidier. My mother's. Her ink was dark, her sentences short. He forgives you. He says it every night before sleep. But I think he's saying it to himself. The paper trembled in my hands. I read it again, slower this time. He forgives you. The words felt like they were still learning how to mean what they said. Eli reached for the blue thread on one of the other bundles, ran it through his fingers. She sewed that into the cuffs of his shirts, he said. 1 stitch per prayer. I think he took it as permission. To what? I asked. To keep living, he said. And maybe to come back when he couldn't. The candle popped, the wax sliding down its side like a thought escaping. I could smell the faint sweetness of burnt wick. The letters glowed amber, their shadows stretching long and soft across the table. I opened another later this time. The date was from the winter before he died. Eli. I took the lantern to the bridge today. The ice was thin but kind. I told the river I remembered. I told it to keep the boys safe wherever water ends. I still hear your voice when I light a match, always asking if I'm sure. I'm sure now. Tell her when the time comes to keep the tin close. It knows what to do. Eli swallowed hard. I didn't get that letter, he said. It must have come back here. I folded it carefully. Maybe it was never meant for you, I said. Maybe he was talking to the act of forgiveness itself. He let out a slow breath. He was always better at talking to things that couldn't answer back. Outside, the wind had died. The snow on the windowsill gleamed faintly in the candlelight. It felt like the whole night was leaning in to listen. I used to think he left us, I said. That the work or the guilt or whatever it was mattered more. But now I think he was just walking toward the part of the story he hadn't finished. And what part was that? The ending, I said. The one where someone finally lights the last candle. Eli stared at the flame. Then maybe that's tomorrow's work. I nodded. We'll take the letters to the bridge. Burn them there. Let the light carry what we can't. He didn't answer. His eyes were wet, but he smiled, small like a man remembering how. I gathered the letters back into the chest, tying them again with the blue thread. My hands shook, not from cold but from the strange tenderness of closing something that had stayed open too long. When I tied the final knot, Eli said, "That color looks like morning." "Maybe it is," I said. The candle had nearly burned itself out. Its flame danced lower, fighting for its last bit of air. I blew gently and the smoke curled upward, silver in the lamplight. The smell of extinguished wax, sharp, clean, human, filled the room. We sat a while in that faint smoke, watching it fade. I thought of my father's last line, "Light the candle when you do." I didn't know if forgiveness was something you did or something you received, but I knew it was a beginning. And beginnings, like light, are meant to be shared. Chapter 8. The Boy's Name. By dusk the next day, the sky had gone the color of pewter. The light was thin, like it didn't want to be seen leaving. We walked the old road to the bridge again, Eli and I carrying the chest between us. The wind had teeth but no voice. It pressed against our coats as if it were trying to hold us back. The snow underfoot gave way with that muffled crackling sound that feels almost holy when the world is quiet. Each step measured time more than distance. I kept thinking of the blue thread, of the words bound in it, of how fragile things still manage to hold. When the river came into view, Eli slowed. The bridge stretched ahead, the lantern light shivering against its boards. Beneath, the water moved under a skin of ice, whispering secrets through cracks too fine for daylight. We set the chest down at the center of the bridge. The wood felt cold enough to speak through our gloves. I lit the lantern again, the match flaring bright in the dim. The smell of sulfur rose up like memory, sharp and clean. "Are you ready?" I asked. Eli didn't answer at first. He leaned on the railing, looking down into the water. His face had the stillness of someone meeting an old friend he never meant to see again. He was just a boy, he said finally. 17. Spoke too loud, laughed too hard, made plans too big. The kind of boy that makes the world feel unfinished. He paused, and I could see the way his breath came shorter now, each exhale a cloud that disappeared before it could mean anything. What was he like? I asked. Eli smiled without turning. He'd hum when he worked. Not a song I ever knew, just a sound that kept time with his hands. Said it helped the day move faster. He'd carry that copper ring on the cord and twist it whenever he was thinking. Said it helped him polish time, whatever that meant. He chuckled softly, but it broke in the middle. I keep hearing him at the river even now. Not the fall, not the end. The laughter before. The sound before things become story. We stood there with that sound between us, something neither of us could quite remember but both knew by heart. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small photograph of the three of them, my father, Eli, and Tommy, the boy caught halfway between boyhood and becoming. His grin was quick, like he didn't know he was being captured. Tommy, I said quietly, testing the name in the air. The syllables felt heavier than I expected. It was like saying a word the river had kept secret too long. Eli closed his eyes. Say it again. Tommy, I repeated. The lantern flame trembled as if the air itself had recognized the name. Tommy Ward. The world seemed to listen. Even the river slowed its whisper. Eli's shoulders dropped, his breath catching on something small and sacred. He deserved to be remembered like that, he said. By name. Not just as a story. I nodded. Then that's what we'll give him. I untied the chest and took out the bundle of letters bound in blue thread. The twine felt soft from handling, from years of waiting. I untied the knot and pulled free the top letter. The one addressed to no one, written for the one who finds this light again. We'll burn these, I said. Let the light carry him home. Eli nodded once, slow. And your father too. I knelt and opened the lantern's small door. The flame bent forward, eager. I held the letter just above it until the paper caught. A quiet hiss, a sudden glow, the ink turning liquid before disappearing altogether. The fire crawled across the words, folded them into ash. I let the remains fall from my fingers into the river's thin skin of ice. The wind carried a faint trace of warmth upward, brushing my face before vanishing into the cold. Eli watched in silence, his eyes bright with the reflection of the flame. He'd be glad you did that, he said. I didn't do it for him, I said softly. I did it for the boy. Eli smiled faintly, then looked down at his hands. He called me sir, the first day he met me. Wouldn't stop even after I told him not to. Said his mama raised him on respect and stubbornness. Guess both got him where he went. He took something from his coat pocket. The copper ring, polished now by years of guilt and remembering. Here, he said, offering it. He'd want you to have this. I hesitated. You sure? He nodded. I carried it long enough. It's not mine to keep. I held the ring between my fingers. It was warm, impossibly so for something that had slept in a coat pocket all these years. I slipped it onto the cord from my father's locket and tied the ends together. Then it's home again, I said. We stood there as the sky went darker, the lantern's circle shrinking until all that was left of the day was the river's slow murmur. Eli's voice was low when he spoke again. Your father said once that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about remembering without bleeding. I looked at the flame. You think that's what this is? He nodded. I think it's a start. The last of the letters burned in my hands and I let them fall one by one into the current. Each ember hissed softly against the ice, small bursts of light fading before they reached the far bank. The smell of paper and salt and thyme drifted up, the same smell I remembered from the night we found the candle. When it was done, I closed the chest and rested my hand on its lid. The wood was warm now. Alive almost. Eli reached out and placed his palm beside mine. He'd be proud of you, he said. I looked at him, at the man who'd carried half of my father's burden, at the friend who had come home when no one expected him to. He'd be proud of you too, I said. For coming back. The wind shifted, lifting a curl of smoke from the river's edge. It twined upward into the dark, pale and thin, like the blue thread we'd tied around the letters. For a moment, it looked like it was stitching the sky back together. Eli closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a breath. "Tommy Ward," he said again, as if the name itself was light. "Go easy now." We stood there until the lantern burned low, until the stars began to show through the smoke. Then we turned back toward the house, leaving the bridge and its small, finished silence behind us. The snow creaked beneath our feet. And though neither of us spoke, I swear I heard another set of footsteps beside us. Lighter, quicker. A boy's steps, walking just ahead, humming that same tune Eli had described. Chapter 9: The Lighting. The house met us with a stillness that felt earned. Eli hung the lantern by the door, and its light wavered across the floorboards, warm against the frost that had followed us in. The smell of smoke clung to our coats, sharp and human, the scent of something both ending and begun. I set the empty chest on the table, brushing away the last flecks of ash from my gloves. The letters were gone now, but the blue thread remained, a single loose coil resting on the wood. It caught the light like a small, tired halo. Eli sat, shoulders low, hands clasped between his knees. He looked older in the lamplight, as though the years had finally caught up after waiting patient and quiet. "You did right by him," he said. I shook my head. "No. We did right by the truth." He smiled, but only a little. "Truth don't ask for much, just light enough to be seen once." The candle we'd left burning in the barn had gone out hours ago, and I wondered if its smoke had found the river by now. I wanted to believe that somewhere between those two places, water and wood, guilt and forgiveness, something had settled into peace. Eli pulled the blue thread toward him, twisting it between his fingers. "You think that's it? That it's over now?" I thought about my father's letter, about the words he'd written in that careful, trembling hand. "Light the candle when you do." "No," I said. "Not yet." I went to the shelf where the old tin sat. My fingers hesitated before I lifted the lid. Inside, the matches waited, 3 at the start, 2 now. A key lay beside them, dull in the soft light. "He said this tin knows what to do," I whispered. "Then let's see if it remembers," Eli said. I struck a match. The flame leapt, a tiny act of defiance, bright and sudden as breath after drowning. I touched it to the wick of the candle on the table. It bloomed slow and steady, as if grateful for another chance. The light reached the edges of the room, brushed across the framed photographs on the wall, the ones I'd stopped looking at years ago. My mother's smile. My father's steady gaze. A family caught before they learned how fragile mornings could be. The flame swayed once, then steadied again. "Look," Eli said softly. The candlelight flickered against the far wall, and for a moment, it painted something new there. Shadows shaped like 3 figures standing close together. My father. Eli. The boy. Not perfect outlines, but close enough for belief. They seemed to be leaning toward one another, the way men do when they're ready to forgive. I blinked, and the image folded back into the wall. The room was only light and wood again. "Did you see?" I started. He nodded before I could finish. "Yeah," he said. They were together. I exhaled, long and slow. The match in my hand had burned down to my fingertips. I dropped it into the tin. The smoke curled upward, pale and sweet. Eli leaned forward, elbows on the table. He used to say light was memory doing its best work. I smiled at that. "Then maybe we've remembered enough." He looked at me, eyes soft. "Maybe. But there's one more thing." He reached into his coat pocket and took out something wrapped in cloth. "I found this in his pack long ago. Couldn't bring myself to open it till now." He placed it between us and unfolded the fabric. Inside was a small wooden matchbox, carved with initials, H. W. My father's. The lid slid open with a dry whisper. Inside, one final match rested, blackened at the tip but unburned. "He carved it after the river," Eli said. "Said every man ought to leave behind one light no storm can touch. Told me to keep it until I saw forgiveness with my own eyes." The matchbox felt heavier than it should. I ran my thumb along the letters, tracing their edges. "What do you want to do with it?" I asked. Eli looked toward the window, where the night pressed its face against the glass. "There's a lamp in the barn. The one he never used again. I think he meant it for tonight." I nodded, though the weight of it ached somewhere deep. "Then we'll light it," I said. We stood. The air was colder now, the kind of cold that has its own silence. When we stepped outside, the snow was a pale mirror for the moon. Our footsteps made small sounds that vanished as soon as they were born. The barn waited, its door half open as if expecting us. The air inside carried that mix of hay and iron, of things built to last. The candle on the work table had burned to its base, leaving only a wax pool that caught the lantern light like melted gold. Eli set down the matchbox and lifted the lamp from its hook. The glass was clouded, the wick stiff. I cleaned it gently with the hem of my sleeve, feeling the dust give way beneath my touch. He opened the box and took out the single match. "You do it," he said. "It should be you." My hand trembled as I struck it. The sound, sharp, small, final, seemed to wake the whole barn. The flame rose, thin but alive. I touched it to the wick. The lamp took light like a long-held breath. The flame grew, then steadied, filling the space with warmth that felt older than both of us. Eli stood beside me, his face washed in gold. "There," he said, voice shaking. "That's what he promised." I looked at the lamp. Its glow reached the beams, the walls, the tools that hadn't been touched in years. Everything it touched seemed to soften. Even the cold retreated a little. In the pool of light, I saw what my father had meant all along. Forgiveness wasn't a word you said. It was a thing you tended like fire. You fed it, watched it, protected it from wind. It didn't erase the dark. It made room for it. Eli exhaled, his breath catching in the light like smoke. "I think I can rest now," he said. He reached out and placed his hand over mine on the lamp handle. His palm was warm. "Steady." "Thank you," he whispered, "for keeping your father's promise." The flame trembled between us but didn't falter. When we left the barn, the lamp stayed burning behind us, its glow spilling through the cracks in the wood. From the path, it looked like a heartbeat pulsing faintly in the dark. Back at the house, I turned once before closing the door. The light still held. It wasn't bright, not loud. Just there, doing its quiet work against the dark. I whispered a name into the night. My father's, the boys', my own. All three drifted out together and the wind carried them toward the river. The lamp's flame answered with a small flicker like it understood. And for the first time I didn't feel the cold. Chapter 10, The Walk to the Bridge. The morning came softly, the kind that doesn't so much arrive as unfold. The frost on the window panes caught the first light, scattering it into small, uncertain fragments. The lamp in the barn still burned. I could see its faint golden pulse through the cracks of the wall even from here. It looked smaller now but steady, like it understood its work was nearly done. Eli was gone. His coat was missing from its peg by the door, his boots gone from the mat. In their place sat the blue tin, its lid open, one match left inside. A note lay beside it, scrawled in that same rough hand that carried road dust between its letters. "When to walk the bridge. Don't follow too soon. Light waits better when it's not watched. E." For a long time I just stood there, the quiet settling on my shoulders like another layer of snow. The house creaked once as if shifting to make room for what came next. I made tea out of habit but couldn't drink it. The steam rose and vanished in the same breath, like a ghost that didn't believe in itself. I told myself he'd be back. But something in the air, something tender and final, said otherwise. So I put on my father's coat, the one that still held the smell of him, and stepped outside. The cold was different now. Not cruel, just present. The kind that reminds you you're alive. The snow had a hard shell on top and my boots cracked through it with each step. The trees along the path were lined with frost, their branches bowed in quiet agreement with the season. Halfway to the bridge I saw them. Tracks side by side leading straight ahead. His stride was slower than before, measured. The lantern's light must have swung at his hip, tracing half circles through the dark. The river waited below, half iced, half running. The sound of it was lower now, calmer. It no longer roared. It murmured like it had made peace with itself overnight. When I reached the bridge, the air tasted faintly of smoke and iron. Eli's lantern hung from the railing, still lit, the flame small but unwavering. Beneath it, footprints stopped at the center. There was no other sign of him. No coat. No shadow. Just the river and the light. I called his name once. The echo came back softer, like someone answering in a dream. For a moment I thought I saw him there, just beyond the railing, his coat brushing the wind, his back turned toward me. But when I blinked, the figure was gone and the air was empty again. The lantern's glow caught the snowflakes drifting past, turning them briefly into sparks before they fell. I stepped closer, my hands gripping the railing. The wood was cold enough to sting. "Thank you," I whispered. To him, to my father, to the river, to whoever was still listening. The words didn't echo this time. They settled into the air like dust and stayed there. I lifted the lantern from its hook. The flame inside leaned toward me as if recognizing a familiar face. Its light washed over the bridge boards, catching something near the post. A small scrap of cloth, blue as forgiveness. It was tied in a simple knot. I untied it and a single copper ring rolled into my palm. He'd left it for me. The boy's ring. The promise my father couldn't keep. The one Eli had carried all those years. I closed my fingers around it and felt the warmth still there. It was faint but alive, like a heartbeat learning to rest. The river below sighed. The ice cracked softly and a small patch of open water shone dark and clear. I leaned over the railing and watched it. The reflection was dim but true. Just me, the lamp, and a small circle of light trembling on the surface. For a moment I thought of dropping the ring in, letting the river finish the story. But then I remembered my father's words. Light doesn't have to win. It just has to stay. So I slipped the ring back into my coat pocket. The flame in the lantern flared once as if agreeing. When I turned for home, dawn had broken open in full. The snow no longer looked cold. It looked clean, washed in silver and pale gold. Each tree shadow stretched long across the road, like something reaching toward the light instead of away from it. The walk back felt lighter. The kind of quiet that follows a story well told. At the house, I set the lantern by the window. Its flame was small now, its oil nearly gone. I let it burn anyway. The reflection danced faintly against the glass. A reminder that even the smallest light can find itself doubled if it's willing to face the dark. I poured another cup of tea, this time finishing it. The warmth spread slow and honest. The world outside kept its hush, but it no longer felt empty. On the table, the blue tin waited, its lid open. Inside, the last match lay beside the note. I reached out, touched it gently, and smiled. "Rest easy," I said. Then I closed the lid. Outside, the lamp in the window flickered once, then steadied, one small, faithful star burning against the pale of morning. And that was enough. Chapter 11, The Promise Kept. That night, the wind died completely. The silence pressed so gently against the house that it felt less like absence and more like understanding. I sat at the kitchen table, the lamp from the barn now resting beside the blue tin. Its flame had burned down to a low, steady heartbeat. Every now and then it would flutter, not from draft or breath, but as though remembering something it still meant to say. The snow outside had crusted over, glittering faintly under the early moon. Through the window I could see the faint path to the bridge, our footprints already fading. The world had a way of mending itself even if it didn't forget. The ring lay on the table before me. I'd placed it on top of the folded cloth Eli had left. It caught the lamplight, its copper edge glowing warm against the dark wood. I traced it once with my thumb, the way my father must have done years ago when promises still fit in a pocket. There was a knock at the door. Soft, almost polite. The kind that doesn't ask to be answered. I didn't startle. I just listened. Another knock. Then silence again. When I opened the door, there was no one there. Only the night, still heavy kind. But on the porch rail, tied neatly with a bit of blue thread, hung something small. A folded scrap of paper, edges damp with snow. I untied it and brought it inside. The handwriting was Eli's, shaky but certain. The river gave back what it kept. Don't come looking. It's lighter that way. I've gone to walk him home. Tell your father the light held. E. I read it twice before I could breathe again. The lamp's flame bent low as if bowing to the words. I turned it up gently. The glass fogged for a moment, then cleared. The wick, almost gone, caught one last strong pulse of gold before softening back to stillness. For the first time in years, the house felt whole. Empty in all the right ways. I gathered the ring, the blue thread, and the note, and placed them in the chest with the locket and the letters that hadn't burned. On top of it, I set the matchbox Eli had left, its single match still unstruck. Then I closed the lid. The sound it made, a soft click of wood meeting wood, felt like the ending of a prayer. When I stepped outside, the cold met me like an old friend. The moonlight lay across the snow, turning it silver. Down by the barn, the lamp still glowed through the boards, though I knew no oil could have lasted that long. Its light reached the path like a gentle thread, showing every step between here and the bridge. I followed it once more. Fully. Not because I feared the dark, but because I wanted to remember it. Every crunch of snow, every breath, every small sound the world made when it wasn't afraid of being quiet. When I reached the bridge, the river was open in the middle, a dark ribbon cutting through the white. I could see the reflection of the barn light trembling on its surface, reaching almost to my feet. I set the lantern down on the railing and untied its glass door. The flame inside had gone pale, almost transparent. I held the last match from the tin in my hand, felt its weight. Small, fragile, perfect. "This is yours," I whispered. "Both of you." I struck it. The spark leapt, bright and sure, and the smell of sulfur rose one last time, the scent of beginnings dressed as endings. I touched it to the wick and the flame caught. It rose steady, quiet, confident. I left it there on the bridge, its light bending over the railing and into the water. The wind picked up softly, carrying the smoke downstream. And then, just for a heartbeat, I saw them. Two figures standing at the edge of the far bank, one tall, one slender, both turned toward the light. The boy's hand lifted like he was testing the warmth. My father beside him, his face calm, unburdened. Eli stood a little behind, his shoulders eased, his hat in his hand. The light flickered once and they were gone. The river ran on, quiet and endless. The lamp burned a little longer, then dimmed until the flame was only a glow, then a memory. I stood there until it was dark again. Then I turned toward home. By the time I reached the porch, the eastern sky had begun to pale, the first hint of morning, cold and silver. I paused at the door, looked back one last time. There, in the distance, the bridge caught the dawn and held it for a moment, as if saving a bit of it for later. I went inside. The lamp by the window had gone out, but the house didn't feel dark. It felt warm, filled with all the light we'd finally learned how to keep. I sat at the table, opened the blue tin, and placed the last unburned match inside. Then I closed the lid, and with it the story.